Hey folks, welcome back to the channel. My name is Robin and today I want to talk about an arc I received, and that is Blood of the Old Kings by Sung Il Kim. Apologies if I mispronounce that. I'm working off of my best guesstimation based on those Korean dramas that my wife loves to watch. But yeah, what is this book about? So we have a situation where an empire has become this just dominating invasion, this dominating expansive force. It's invaded and occupied and subjugated numerous different lands, and in one of those lands that they subjugated, they murdered the husband and child of the first POV that we were introduced to, and she sets out on a quest with the aid of the dragon that we see on the cover of this book, so that's not a spoiler. With the aid of this dragon to topple the empire and basically become the king after 20 years of subjugation under the empire. Then we have a few other storylines that are actually going on along the way. We have a good Samaritan who is in the heart of the empire. His parents were rebellion members, but they died, and they basically had him spirited away to the capital. He's since grown up there, and he does the odd fixer job here and there. He gets embroiled in things when his best friend, one of his closest friends, turns up dead, and no one seems to care, and he just starts to go down the path of what caused their death. And then the third major POV that we follow is this young sorceress who she was brought to the capital to essentially serve as a battery for the magic of this world, because that's one of the cool things about this world. And this is in the blurb of the book, so it's not a spoiler. The empire uses the corpses of sorcerers to power pretty much everything in this world. So we have these three POVs, and together they combine to create a tried and tested tale of revolution in the face of an oppressive force. And that, in a nutshell, is Blood of the Old Kings. So what did I think of it? Now, first of all, I approach this with a bit of trepidation because it was first written in Korean, and it's a translated book, and translated books are very, very dependent on the skill and the ability of the translator. So a lot of the author's intentions may not basically translate over to English properly because we simply lack the context in which they were written, or the words may not even exist in English that match perfectly to the author's original intent. So for things like this, translations can be very iffy. And when I first started reading this, I thought, given the way the prose was, I thought initially that this book did suffer a bit from translation issues. But as things progress, I realized that's not the case. The author instead goes very much for the sword and sorcery of the 80s, style fantasy vibe. So there is some character work in there, but it's not too much. There is some world building in there, it's not too much. Things are very fast paced, things are very action packed. There's no wastage of words. We just go non-stop. It's tight, it's very tight, it's very fast paced, it's very intense. There's no fluff, essentially. This is like, you may enter this thinking that it's epic fantasy, but it's much more. I think it's a much more reasonable assumption to chalk it up more along the lines of sword and sorcery from the 80s and 70s. It has that vibe, and by the end of the book I could heavily feel that inspiration, even if the story itself is more of an epic fantasy style of story. So that's the first heads up about the prose. Once that kind of clicked for me, I immediately started to enjoy things much more a bit more than I initially expected to, because this is a very fun story. It's very creative. Like one of the joys of reading non-Western, like authors of like non-Western heritage, is that their cultural context, their background, their traditions, their life essentially. They will be influenced by fancy as it has come before, yes, but they also have these other pools of knowledge that they can draw on that Western fantasy simply does not or may not have access to, and it influences their books in interesting ways, in creative ways, and we kind of see that here. Like I'm sure if we like did a very deep dive into some of the things here, we will find correlations with like it may not be overt, but I'm sure we will find things that have like a root within Korean or Asian culture in general, that kind of thing. But essentially, I found it very creative. They're creative by genre fantasy standards. They're like, first to start with, there's the whole setup around the sorcerers of this world, where their value is not in their life but in their death. Their corpses are essentially batteries that are used to power that are used to power pretty much the infrastructure of this entire world. And then there's the empire and the tools and the tools and the technology they've devised over the course of their conquest, of their decades long conquest and these kind of things. There's the dragon that we meet right off the bat, which is quite different from pretty much any dragon I can ever recall reading about in fantasy. And it was like the entire introduction scene with we get the dragon right off the bat, by the way. That entire scene was pretty sick. And yeah, it's just like I enjoyed that aspect of it. Like, it may not necessarily be things that will blow your mind, but it is much more creatively done than a lot of genre fantasy out there. Characterization, like there is some level of characterization in here. In particular, like we do explore the consequences of the paths that these three different characters have chosen, and basically the consequences that they face, their internal motivations for why they're doing what they're doing, because they didn't, in all three cases, they kind of jumped into things not realizing how deep the rabbit hole would go. And after a while, in all three cases, they did kind of have to take a step back and question their motivations and get that internal drive that they needed to move forward. And so that was a common thread with all three characters. And at the same time, like, there wasn't that much character work done here. Like I said, this is very much fantasy from like the 80s, so there is some characterization, but it's not like the predominant focus of the story. Instead, this is very much action. Like, this is a fast-paced action. We go from different types of battles, different types of high-intensity situations. It was really nice. Like, it was a fun read. Once I kind of understood what the author was trying to do, kind of took a step back and just went along for the ride to see where the story went. It was a very fun read. I enjoyed it immensely. And then we came to the end, which was a bit ambiguous. It kind of leaves things open for more to the story. But it did achieve the overarching plot of this story itself. So there could very well be sequels. Like, I don't see any indication that there will be sequels to this book, as it will be published in its current form. But it certainly seems like there are sequels to this story. So I'm all aboard. Like, this is I honestly didn't know what to expect with this book. I'm not gonna lie. I got the cover alone was enough to intrigue me, and I'm that kind of shallow reader, and what I found was a pretty fun story. So, Like, if there's more to come in this world, I'm all for it. I think after having fully read the story, I think Antonor did a pretty good job in the translation. Um, I didn't even look into his biography or anything to see what his credentials are to kind of qualify him for this. I wanted to judge him based on my reaction to the story, and I think he did a good job of getting the. For me, it felt like he did a good job of getting across the heart of the story. The fact that I could pick up so much of the author's intentions from it. And yeah, like it was a great story. Like it had a lot of. It was a bit meatier than I expected after I realized it's not necessarily an epic fantasy story in the sense of what I'm accustomed to when I think epic fantasy. Like I thinking big door stoppers. No, it is an epic fantasy, but it's very abbreviated. Like this is a short book. It's not super short, but it is short by epic fantasy standards. And yeah, like it was a blast from start to finish. There are numerous scenes I can think of that I enjoyed immensely, and I am all aboard for any sequels that are forthcoming. If you're interested in this book, if you like the sound of anything that I've described so far, I definitely think you should pick this up, because like one thing I do want to see more in the space is not just like diversity from Western authors, but also stories from entirely different cultures that are translated and make their way into the genre. And because there is there is so much scope and expansion that these stories can bring to the genre as a whole, I firmly believe. And yeah, I think that's pretty much all I have to say about this book. If you've made it this far, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you when I see you.